Welcome back to the SMITE Challenger Circuit playoffs here in our Road to Worlds for the European side of things. Our next match coming up is going to be the Solar Scarabs and the Niflheim Wargs. I'm Jim. I got Mifflin still with me here on the desk. We get ready to jump into our second set. And just wanted to give a friendly reminder to those who are wondering, okay, well, things look a little bit different. This isn't the schedule I thought it was. We did have a forfeit in our match that would have been in this place here with the Titans and the Penguins. So the Titans will be getting themselves the 2-0 here. Instead, we will now be moving in to this matchup again, which will be the Scarabs and the Wargs facing off. And this should be a fun one, Miff. We kind of alluded to it kind of at the end of the previous test segment. These are two very powerful teams, a second and third seed for the Scarabs and Wargs respectively, with some very tenured names on their rosters.
There are. It is worth noting, though, for the Solar Scarabs, they have had a recent replacement. I believe it's Emilito replaced by iSilenced, but otherwise the roster that you become accustomed to seeing, Echrome, Zyrhoes, Apreel, and Deathwalker flanking them. On the other side, it's Panvich, WorstTurttle, GunTTeRR, Predss, and iDavy. So lots of talent between these two squads, teams that you've seen a good deal, and players that have been sticking together a good while. I believe now going on 2 years for some of these rosters. So you should have some experience watching them. What you can expect, I think, is a faster playstyle. We tend to see that at the top of the EU-SCC. Europe has always had a very distinct playstyle in that they like slow, meta-based games. Let me lock down the macro. Okay, we could take out the Titan, but it's more guaranteed if we come back later. These guys tend to end their games a little bit faster.
You kind of have almost that division among some of those teams where you have like the number 1, 2, 3 are typically your more fast-paced. You're just going to be your run it down. Think of the days of like Belt Slap and Elysium, kind of some of the old days of SCC time, kind of now forming their way into some of these new squads that like to kind of play a bit quicker more than anything. And then sometimes you have those middle pack or the lower seed teams that tend to play things a little bit more methodical, try and play the macro a little bit more. But sometimes you don't need macro when you can just push your buttons better than other teams, and that's what some of these guys have been doing for years, as mentioned with the Scarabs, Deathwalker, Apreel. Then you have Zyrhoes, iSilenced, and Echrome to round out the Scarabs roster. For the Wargs, it's Panvich, WorstTurttle, GunTTeRR, Predss, and Davy to round these guys out. And I mean, these have been some of the hardest hitting players in the EU-SCC for quite some time now. The better part of the last 2 years, these have been the names that are consistently at the top end.
And I should say, take with a grain of salt what I said just previously about the games being faster. When matches are as evenly matched as I'm expecting this one to be, the second and third seed in Europe, of course, you can probably expect it to be a bit more back and forth. Back and forth tends to lead to later games. Later games means you don't want to make mistakes, so longer fire giant dances. There is potential here for these games to go very long. But also, if either side develops an early lead, this is not one where I would expect a lead to get fumbled. Europe is always really good at securing guaranteed victories.
Yeah, it's less so the length of game being faster, but more so the pacing and the momentum being a little bit quicker. So we'll kind of see maybe if that reflects in the picks and bans. We jump into those for game number 1 here between the Solar Scarabs and Niflheim Wargs. See how much of the meta from some of these other matchups continues to reflect with these two teams out here. If I look over at solo lane, Deathwalker has been doing some funky stuff over in the solo for really quite some time. He's one of those guys where he knows the meta, he understands the meta, but sometimes he just wants to do his own thing. When everybody else is playing the King Arthurs, the Sun Wukongs, things like that, Deathwalker's actually going, what if I just play Mulan for like 6 games in a row and nobody beats me on those kinds of gods? So interesting to see what Deathwalker maybe pulls out in this kind of this mage solo style of meta.
Yeah, he marches to the beat of his own drum, and that is generally hyper-aggressive picks. I'm going all the way back to Worlds and thinking about things like the tier. Apwash locked in for the Solar Scarabs, a pick that has had a lot of contention on it in the SPL. We saw in the last week of the SPL, I believe it was a top priority solo laner. So much damage, great space control, great sustain in lane as well. That's something that people are not talking about enough, is how difficult it is to actually do real damage to Apwash when he can just back up to his tower, eat some corpses, get his cooldown back, get his mana back, and his HP, rinse, repeat until he's back at full strength. Otherwise, speaking of sustain, Yamoja Hover for the Solar Scarabs, that's a very scary top 3.
I mean, when you look at what got banned away, Mamon makes sense. Saw an amazing performance out of WorstTurttle just yesterday on this one, a 5-0 start in 5 minutes from him, so no surprise seeing that one banned, along with Poseidon Anhur. Opposite side, we saw the Thoth, Athena, and the Chernobog, which now leads us to a Raijin, Khepri, Izanami. Top 3 for the Wargs. And there's really nobody that's playing Izanami right now. We look even at the SPL level, it's really only guys like Netroid who are kind of bringing this pick.
It's Nat.
What is it about Izanami that just makes her so strong, or maybe kind of makes her an option for some of these hunters?
Yeah, so strong makes it sound like everybody's playing it. She's aight. She's okay. pressure, though. That's why you generally go towards that Izanami. It's the piercing auto attacks, the boomerangs, the good kill secure as well. A lot of people utilizing Dark Portal to actually secure the kill itself, but having that silence makes it easy for you to lock someone down, stick to them, and finish them off with those auto attacks. So surprising kill pressure. Generally, it's that lane pressure, though, that tends to bring favor towards Izanami, especially in a meta, and I believe it was Zapman that had said this, which is a crutch duo pressure meta. Well, you get pressure in duo, you get a gold fury, you get a few shield buffs, maybe a purple buff invade, and all of a sudden the entire map is playing with a lead.
Yeah, we've had a few pros come out and just kind of talk about how duo is all about how much pressure can you get in those first 5 or so minutes. Izanami will surely be able to get you quite a bit of that. In response, though, Susano and Discordia for the Solar Scarabs to round out their bottom 2. Thor and Vulcan on the opposite side there for the Niflheim Wargs. We've been seeing a little bit more Vulcan kind of pop up. Seems that the secure burst made style is really starting to come back out as opposed to the more kind of residual style of damage that we've been seeing from some things like the Opwash, which is kind of made its way over towards the solo lane. But I'm kind of wondering if this Discordia maybe lands itself in mid, or maybe do you think Deathwalker do something silly and plays Discordia solo?
I mean, we've seen both of them in the solo lane, Discordia and Opwash. I would prefer to see Disco in mid, but with Deathwalker, I mean, you really never know. It's whatever he feels like.
We'll have to see what both these two teams are feeling as we jump into game number 1. It's the Solar Scarabs and the Niflheim Wargs, and we'll throw it over to our casters.
Thank you very much, JMac and Mifflin, myself, Supersonic Blur, and Kaizo here to break down the second set of the day. Solar Scarabs, Niflheim Wargs. This is a matchup we've cast before throughout the SCC. And, well, metas may change in things, but as it stands right now, both of these comps look like they got everything they wanted, Kaizo.
Yeah, I was actually just thinking that when we were watching these picks drafted initially is backdrop for this conversation. iSilenced is invading purple for free. Like, there is nobody here to stop him from doing this. I don't think he gets the full buff, so it's a little bit surprising that he's still committing to this, but a very fascinating opening act here.
Okay. I mean, he did this yesterday on the Fafnir as well, but just trying to buy some time, strip away farm by the looks of it. It's not going to get punished too heavily for it. Is this just like a player preference thing, or is this something that other teams could adopt as well?
A little bit of both, honestly. I don't know what the real punish is for doing something like this, because obviously the person who is invading is losing out on farm, right? Like, you get a very minimal percentage of the farm that you're invading because you're taking it away from the enemy team. We are trying to stop the invade meta a little previously, so Invader's Curse came out. You got a reduction to the gold and the experience you get from invading farm, and that's sort of supposed to kind of dissuade you from doing that, but it does still deprive the enemy team of a critical early power spike, makes them come online a little bit later on in the game, and does get your ADC pretty far ahead. I mean, Echrome is just by definition going to be farther ahead because he's had the option to farm more stuff than the Niflheim Wargs have. iDavy is going to be a little bit behind as a result of that, so Silence kind of a sacrificial lamb in that conversation. It is definitely something more people could be doing. They just don't want to.
Well, I don't think Zyrhoes wanted to take quite so much damage or have their beads forced as the Opwash in mid. We were all thinking this was going to be Opwash solo, but Deathwalker doing their own thing. We'll go with Disco solo. We'll potentially talk about that in a bit, but you can see there, Scarabs have had a little bit of pressure thrown their way, and there's so much on this map I want to talk about. Like, I'm looking at this, I'm seeing Davy's got Tainted Steel first item. I'm seeing the Opwash and Deathwalker situation to deal with. Like, take your pick, Kaizo.
It's a lot. It really is. And I guess I'll lead off with, we can talk about the Deathwalker Disco at any point in the game. Like, that is definitely something we'll need to get to at some point. But I want to start with the iDavy Tainted Steel, because this is actually not the first time I've seen this, and I don't believe it's going to be the last either. So the reason you get starter items is you want to have sustain in lane, you want to clear a little bit better, you don't want to get poked out, and you want something that transitions pretty well into the late game. Izanami doesn't really need a ton of help with wave clear in particular. Her sustain is fine just because she doesn't have to take too much damage for clearing the wave. So you get that option for a very high utility item for the Izanami, and Tainted Steel obviously applies anti-heal, which is very critical against the Solar Scarabs. You don't want to itemize into a Toxic Blade or a Brawler's Beatstick as one of these ADCs. The Deathbringer glyph just takes a little bit too long to get online. So it does give you some pretty interesting utility, and in particular on Izanami, just because of the way her auto attacks function, cleaving the wave, you don't really feel like you miss out on a whole lot. She's probably going to be fine on health. She's probably going to be fine on mana. So why not just provide a little bit of extra something to your team?
And that little extra something might be useful in those team fights. We'll have to see if the teams do want to try and focus on this duo lane side of things. Usually there's this idea of, is there pressure in one lane? Do the junglers go over and potentially out-rotate that? But keep an eye, WorstTurtle's already up. That's level 5. Level 5s are hitting big right now for the Niflheim Wargs. WorstTurtle not able to close the gap just yet. And so, instead, it kind of ends up as a wash. The Susano goes in.
Ooh.
It's a lot of pressure out onto WorstTurtle, but kind of a wash there for these two fights.
I think Apreel underestimated his damage there. If he charges up the Typhoon, he might have lethal damage onto WorstTurtle. I honestly, frankly, surprised by the damage he did put out there, but WorstTurtle will manage to live another day. If you're wondering why the Thor didn't land on top of the person being CC'd, well, he didn't start the ult in an optimal location where he could have actually reached there. He just landed close enough that he could help out, so no harm, no foul as everybody trades out and backs up. Notably, though, iSilenced and Predss both got to hang on to their ults, so just junglers and ADCs trading out. And Predss obviously not likely to make an aggressive play with that, but Silence certainly could go for another one of these very degenerate early buff invades, maybe by himself on the next purple buff, for example. So maybe keep your eye on that.
Yeah, they've had the proclivity for wanting to do that. Like I said, we saw this yesterday coming through on the Fafnir, where levels 1 through 3 didn't really matter for them. I thought, though, that Umoja, really mattered a lot, but now they've got the Gauntlet of Thieves to start stacking up. Apreel takes a little bit more damage here, fires the ult off defensively. WorstTurtle will beads, and now they're going to get their own beads forced on a route from Predss. And this is just a walk it down right now. Silenced is here. That dissuades the rest of the fight. So a couple of scrappy fights, and it has been these junglers who have been dishing out a lot of the damage.
And Zyrhoes drops the ult there to, I guess, just prevent anybody further from walking through, because that's obviously not the direction that Apreel elected to walk through in order to get to safety, instead favoring going toward his support, which, for you viewers at home, always your best play. Walk towards your support. Please, God, yes, we want to help you.
Do. Is that the best part is when you're in the ranked queues and then whoever it is who's running away from you pings you like, why did you not come to me? Oh,
I was doing my best, man. You were running away from me. You're actively avoiding the safety.
Maybe that's why these front lines usually get some movement speed in their kit. It's so they can chase down their allies. It
feels like babysitting at times, man. It really does. You just gotta chase them around like toddlers and make sure they don't hurt themselves.
So on that line then, iSilenced, who has iSilenced got to babysit the most here? Is it Echrome? Is it Apreel because they've been focused? Is it the immobile Zyrhoes? Who needs the most help here?
In theory, it should be Zyrhoes, and I think production knows because we already pan over to the AP as this conversation starts up, but Mr. World Champion himself is, in theory, the most vulnerable player on this map because no innate CC immunity, unlikely to build any defense coming out of the mid lane. We're used to seeing the Pythagorean's piece and the the Vampiric Shroud, and all of these hybrid items, but not likely in mid.
Deathwalker, though, still playing on the mage. Got some tankiness to their name, but not a whole lot. As Panvich needs one more shot, but can't quite find it. WorstTurtle look to get aggressive with their ults. That's 2 ults traded out for Deathwalkers. A TKO, but nothing really to abuse with that time spent walking back to lane.
And they do actually pull some pretty meaningful cooldowns out of the Discordia, in particular that Golden Apple, which doesn't seem like a lot by itself, but when you consider the fact that Deathwalker already missing the beads, that's just another safety tool taken away from him. And I do think that's the direction we need to be looking, because I said we'd talk about it later. It feels like the right time now to bring up that Deathwalker is taking the less traditional of the two mages that the Solar Scarabs have into the solo lane. And DW's been doing this a lot this weekend. I mean, we've been seeing more of the Hera from him recently, which I think is a fascinating idea for a solo laner. I've always said that Hera is a character that should be building hybrid to start with, but we're seeing a lot more of that as Vulcanult doesn't land a home. I do think Disco is... Okay, let me back up. I think that solo lane mages in general function off of one concept. You can build utility mages a little bit tanky and then still feel relevant. If you're building a straight damage mage, then it's not as good. You're not going to see, or at least you're less likely to see, a Thoth solo, for example, just because his utility isn't great. Low CC, needs more damage scaling in order to make himself feel relevant.
Yeah.
Discordia has an amazing passive, has a great teamfight ult, and that Strife, if that lands on 2 people in a teamfight, it doesn't matter if he's got 5 tank items or 0 tank items. It's still incredibly impactful, makes people want to use beads, makes it so that people lose some of the communication thread in the middle of a teamfight. I think that Disco has a lot of the core tenets of what a solo lane mage needs to be. I'd still probably prefer to see the Op Wash over there, just because that's been tried and tested. I mean, for God's sake, Blur, we've seen a quadra kill on an Op Wash solo just this weekend, but Discordia, definitely no slouch herself.
And the idea that you get to live longer means you get to throw out more of your cooldowns, you get to sit in that puddle where you get more cooldowns. It kind of makes sense. She's there to cause mischief and mayhem, which is fairly fitting for the God of Discord, so... We'll see whether that goes out. Still no kills across the board, though attempts have been made here as we make it to where about 9.5 minutes in. Gold also incredibly even between these two, and Niflheim mentioned it on the desk. This is a very even matchup between these two teams, and WorstTurttle might want to tip the scales in their favor. They have ulted, but look at that. Apreel goes straight towards iSilenced. WorstTurttle says, I want none of that, and so dips.
Wow, that's crazy. He walked toward his support, and then the enemy team stopped attacking him. Isn't that weird, Blur, how that works out? I don't know. Something funky about that.
I know. As now, see a little bit of aggression. Zyrhoes throws out the ults. Everyone disengages. GunTTeRR ult as well. Is it Niflheim Wargs who need to be the aggressors in these kind of fights? We've seen it kind of be WorstTurttle, but just a second here. iDavy looking to get aggressive. WorstTurtle catches Echrome at the end! And the beads are forced. Is it enough to close the gap? It's not quite. WorstTurtle's going for it. He'll dash on in under the tower, and that's first blood.
He might get away with it too. Predss is here. Watch this. He's going to take the Khepri ult. Oh, maybe not.
No,
I was going to say he's going to take the Khepri ult, walk into T2. He might die to minions, Blur.
He's going to die to minions. He'll die. I think that was always the plan, to die, but in the end... I mean, hey, there's still a 0 on the side of Solar Scarabs. No anything for them, really, off of that. So WorstTurttle... I mean, hey, it's a hero's death.
I guess. Press F to pay your respects. I really did think that the idea of that play... I thought Predss was that deep because the play was, you're going to drop the Scarab's Blessing on top of Apreel, and then he just walks into T2 and gets out for free. I guess technically, now that I'm thinking about it, though, that's not too much time off the map missing for Apreel. He's not giving that kill to anybody, so no gold bounty going as a direction of, like, you know, a consequence for his actions. So why not just hang on to the Scarab Blessing for a later date? That keeps GunTTeRR a little bit safer, although he doesn't seem to be under too much contest. I changed my mind, Blur. It's a much better play to just hang on to that Khepri ult for sure.
Yeah, I mean, plus also with iSilenced there, they want 100% if someone else is coming over, maybe Rivers Rebuke catches them out, and then it becomes a bit more of a problem. Now, Predss does have the upgraded starter item to try and help out with this Rivers Rebuke, but we've yet to see any of those go off just yet. And I'm kind of okay with how everything is playing out. It's either WorstTurttle... I always like to look at the second item in a build. It kind of feels to me how these two want to play out. It's a Brawler's Beat Stick. That to me screams we're dealing with anti-heal straight away. That's Zyrhoes and iSilenced. That's where the focus could potentially be.
And Deathwalker showing us what this Discordia is capable of, and I do think that's probably really frustrating to play with if you're Panvich, because he just jumps in that cloud and then you're already building ample amounts of cooldown with this mage solo build, and once you get into that Discordia puddle, those cooldowns are probably on like half-second timers, which means that he's just going to be throwing them out left and right, and he can probably brawl with it too.
Okay, well, there's a Thor ult just to announce presence over at the Oracles. I believe split 1-for-1, so hey, it's a fair trade and no robbery, though, again, losing out this Thor ult. He's been very lackadaisical about using these as the Vulcan ult lands on Davy for support and making sure no one else goes through. The 3v4 situation for the Niflheim Wargs over and around this buff. There are some smatterings of thinking, are we looking at potentially a Gold Fury? But again, just Niflheim Wargs throwing out these ults so quickly and aggressively, they're not really finding a home.
But there's no reason not to try it, right? Like, nothing else is happening on the map. I mean, you could make the argument that because those ults are down, the Scarabs can look for a potential Gold Fury, but they don't really seem all that perturbed by the way that the map is going right now. They seem pretty comfortable just hanging out and farming it up, and a lot of that is probably due in part to the fact that their late game composition, very good.
Okay. Well, Blink on through from apreel, gets both ults for the Typhoon. They're going to try and do this all over for a green buff. They do secure it, but then they just walk away from this. I mean, hey, they got some extra farm here. I'm not sure whether or not it's a good idea. 3-man root, Predss sets up something big for a team that's just not there.
Oh.
They all disengage, and maybe Niflheim Wargs, they're going to be the ones who coalesce around this Gold Fury. Silence is half health. Apreel's got no ult. Zyrhoes has no ult. Who's going to stop them?
Panvich is here. Echrome's on the way in.
Well, it's already gone. Too little, too late for that. Now, again, it's just a re-aggression for ifs, ands, or buts. But look how precision disengaged Wargs are. It's get in, get out, and that's it. It's Davy. Uh-oh, could be in a spare bit of trouble there. 2v1. They wanted to be a bit sneaky around the buff. Unfortunately, there's no such thing as a 1v1 in the duo lane.
That's the worst feeling as an ADC, or any character for that matter, when you know that if you don't use your movement ability, you are dead to rights, but you've got that wind siphon on you, or excuse me, the jet stream, and you know that all you have to do is jump over the wall, and then suddenly apreel teleports behind you and finishes you off, so he dies regardless of what he does there. Does hang on to the beads and the Aegis, which is at least a good thing for him, so next time that play rolls around could be a little bit safer. In fact, I thought that I saw beads go off on somebody. I guess I must be tripping because no beads utilized in that little interaction there. And despite the fact that the Wargs get the kill and get the, hang on, WorstTurttle dunking in, apreel gets stunned.
And there's a little bit more follow-up here, but it's mostly Discordia's damage to dissuade it out, and that's exactly what you were just talking about! The jet stream causes trouble, and apreel picks up a pick of their own. 2-1, Solar Scarabs leading it. With that Gold Fury going to Niflheim Wargs, we're still at parity here.
Yeah, look at how little gold deviation we've seen in this game. In fact, usually those numbers, the little ticks on the graph are 15, 2,000, something like that, just because at some point, somebody gets closer to a larger lead. It's only been about 1,000 gold variance in this one, which is pretty indicative of the pacing of this game, Blur. It's been very quiet so far. There've been a lot of ults being thrown out, but it's a lot of happenstance that they're really fishing for. Nothing really forced other than the one green buff invade, which looks like they might be trying for again. Everything else has been pretty calm and collected.
And that's just the way the Solar Scarabs have been liking to play this. Vulcano is up, but it only hits silenced. And as a result, the green buff does still go down. Predss, though, might be in a lot of trouble. Echrome's made the rotation, mounted archery to close the gap. And it'll force out the Scarab's Blessing onto Predss. That is a big win for the Scarabs. The first Blessing we have seen, and it is forced to Predss alone.
Panvich was there as well. That's not the first time that he's rotated ahead of Deathwalker, who is just farming it up on an island, man. I mean, this guy is very content to just stick around and get as much farm as he can. About a level, call it a level and a half up on his solo lane opposition. And Panvich misses out a little bit of farm there. The Gold Fury rotation was good because they got gold, but he is steadily falling behind as Niflheim Wargs contend with this Pyro.
It is known about. The jet stream in, and out comes the ultimate, but just a little too late. Pyromancer is secured by the Niflheim Wargs. And just to touch on what you mentioned here, Deathwalker, yeah, is one for farming. Zyrhoes also likes to try and play this way as well. It's caused some of the Solar Scarabs, or rather Deathwalker and Zyrhoes, whatever team they've been on, some trouble in the past, where you've got two lanes looking to just farm to the late game. But the way that it's been, Niflheim Wargs have been the ones calling the shots, and they've just been reacting to it so well. They've not given up anything too dramatically, where they lost a Gold Fury. Okay. They lost a Pyromancer. Okay. They've answered back on the kills very effectively, and the way this is going, Solar Scarabs can just go
Here we
towards
go.
this late game fight, but Echrome double dunked in by the ultimates. Apreel stunned on out. Now it's 2 1v1s. The Wind Siphon back on through keeps Apreel out from the fight, meaning Echrome gets picked up in a 2v1. And now it's just the members from Solar Scarabs disengaging. And though, maybe a little bit more aggressive? No, we are going to see the disengage.
And Phantom Shell burned there. More action in right lane, though.
Okay.
Deathwalker taking the 1v1. Panvich 1 auto away from death. And Deathwalker will finally land it. That solo kill was a long time coming, Blur. It ends up 3 for 2 and still just about deadlocked in this one, which is just shocking compared to... I feel like, if I'm not mistaken, on the desk, it was Mifflin that was saying that these two teams in particular have been much faster paced than a lot of the EU scene has been up until this point. Obviously, if you haven't been around in SMITE for too long, EU pretty well known for a slower play style. Niflheim Wargs are definitely lending to that.
Well, maybe, but maybe Niflheim Wargs can lend the Solar Scarabs a little bit of extra gold. The answer is no. They secure themselves this Fury. Scarabs try and be aggressive on the backside, but yeah, Deathwalker still no rotation out from this lane, constantly putting pressure down. Apreel looks to Davy. The Scarab's blessing at just the last second means that it is not even a TKO.
2 objectives for the... Actually, 3, now that I think about it. They've gotten both Gold Furies and a Pyromancer for the Niflheim Wargs, and it's just 1 kill in the lead and a little bit more effective farming. That is making sure that the Scarabs are at least keeping up with them. Now getting to about a 1,000 gold, which still not the best, but hang on. Apreel is... There's a collapse coming here. This does not look good.
It does not, because they've got the Scarab's blessing. They'll even catch out the dash, and Davy can't go anywhere except into the dirt once again. Apreel picks that one up. Beautiful, just like you said. There's a collapse coming. It would have been faster if minions hadn't body blocked the jet stream, but even so, recognizing, hey, that tier 1 tower is nothing. At 20 minutes in, that offers you no support, no safety, and no way you can afford to just let someone walk in like that. I'm surprised that the warding, though, sorry, the Wargs themselves weren't more grouped up for that. They'd been around and looking for fights. Now Solar Scarabs start taking fights. They're nowhere to be seen.
Playing it a little bit safer, and that is something that when we've talked about this Solar Scarabs team in the past, Blur, throughout the SCC season, I've made mention of the fact that Deathwalker and Zyrhoes, like you said, very slow playstyles for most of their careers, content to farm up and then make those critical rotations as they occur. But that does mean that once they finally strike back, it's like you've been watching this sleeping giant the entire time, and you expect, well, he's been sleeping for 20 minutes, he'll be sleeping for 2 more minutes. When they finally do decide to strike, I mean, it is decisive. It is very sudden, and that can catch a lot of teams off guard if you allow yourself to be lulled into that false sense of security and just assume that things are going to be quiet, going to be slow for the rest of the game. You are going to get caught off guard, and it could be very bad for you if you're the Niflheim Wargs. We saw a little bit of that in the dual lane, but still nothing big enough to really shake up the state of this game. It's still dead even, like if we had to fight to the death over the Fire Giant. There is no team that's favored, call it the Scarabs, just because of this XP lead that they've been cultivating, but a lot of that is on Deathwalker, some of that on Echrome as well, who both of which have ticked over to level 20 the first of the game. Does mean that as soon as Echrome wants to rotate, the Scarabs could look for some of these bigger fights.
Man, iSilenced is so deep in enemy territory, and is going to be punished so heavily for it. Rest of Solar Scarabs are doing the Pyromancer, and now Wargs find themselves up 1 member. They can look to this Pyromancer themselves. Thoralt goes to dissuade any further follow-up from that, and Solar Scarabs, that was just iSilenced. I don't want to say meandering around, because they were trying to zone. They just didn't expect everyone from the Wargs to be here, and since they're over here, why not look towards the Fire Giant? Deathwalker does get a big 2-man strife, and a lot of damage going their way. Another good bit of damage. Stygian Beacon coming up soon, but who cares about that? Fire Giant's been stolen away by the Solar Scarabs.
And the Echrome kill goes down onto Predss. It's a chase from Deathwalker onto Panvich, and GunTTeRR is in no man's land here, contending with Apreel. He's 1 HP and somehow squeaks away for the time being, but I feel like it is inevitable. I say inevitable, but he disagrees as he lands a meatball to peel for himself.
That, I think, was almost frame perfect. WorstTurttle looked like... sorry, not WorstTurttle, sorry, but whoever was chasing him out looked like they were about to follow up. But alas, that is not the case. GunTTeRR gets to go ahead and make their way back towards base. Eventually, they stick around for a little bit of extra farm because they can. But that said now, Solar Scarabs get themselves Fire Giant. It's swung to a 4K lead. I swear, literally a minute ago, we were just saying, oh, the game's dead even, fight to the death of a Fire Giant. No, it's 4K gold lead. Both towers in mid now gone. And Solar Scarabs are starting to call the shots here. Oni Fury for them as well. Can they look towards Phoenix Sieges here, or is it just sweep up the towers?
I feel like you probably start with the towers. You don't want to go too hard too fast, but this is, I mean, this is the old Sanguine playstyle, right? Like if you go back a couple of years where they say, all right, we will be a little bit behind. If it's 1,000 gold, if it's 2,000 gold, that's fine. We're going to farm up casually. We're not worried about the state of the game. And then we will just team fight better than you once it gets to that stage of the game. And the Solar Scarabs have done so in the only team fight we've seen so far. And a lot of that came from just the utility out of Zyrhoes and Deathwalker that empty the crypts, creating so much space. Deathwalker landing that critical strife on a couple of members, getting the Golden Apple of Discord into the backline. It's just havoc every time the Solar Scarabs take one of these fights. There's so much large AoE that you have to dodge out between empty the crypts, the Typhoon, the River's Rebuke. Feels like there's no good place for you to stand, in particular if you're trying to concentrate around that Fire Giant pit. It looks like the Scarabs take down the T2 and left and are now contending with the Phoenix Blur.
Well, a little bit of poke out from WorstTurttle towards iSilenced and Zyrhoes, but the sustain is still there from them from Fire Giant. I think it was more a case of testing the response time. They did have two members, I believe it was Panvich and iDavy, over pushing up that solo side. They got tier 1, so Solar Scarabs wanted to see just how quickly they could push in. The answer is not particularly, but I love what you mentioned there. Scarabs have such good zone control, and there is no answer back. It has to be Wargs diving in first, getting a pick, and then looking to abuse that situation. If the fight is just 5v5, Scarabs can say the entire swath of the Fire Giant pit, Gold Fury pit, tier 2 tower range, you can't stand in here. And that does give me concerns. If it works on Fire Giant pit, it should also work on Phoenix, right?
Yeah, that definitely is true. They do have very good clear for the Niflheim Wargs, which is one of the things you typically look at when you're considering this siege defense for one of these teams. GunTTeRR, very effective clear. Panvich as well can help out with some of that. And neither one of them have to get too particularly close. It's just a matter of, can you defend the Phoenix once they walk in and use some of these big space control tools? And I do think Khepri is probably one of the better ones to help you out with that, just because you can pick somebody who's too far forward. If you need to suicide dive, you can get resurrected for it. They're going to have to make some magic happen here because the Titan walking down, still full HP. Everybody's grouped up on this right-hand side. Looks like Solar Scarabs are going to try to break the base in this right Phoenix.
It'll have to be a little bit of poke out from Solar Scarabs, but they've got ultimates available for them. Titan goes in, Frenzy is popped. River's Rebuke is there. Can our Wargs answer? This is a huge ult coming forward, and now it's on for a potential chase down. Will they have the range to do so? Thor is up. Where do they choose to land? It is in on 3. Deathwalker's low, but Deathwalker just about gets away, and now using River's, or not River's Rebuke, but the empty the crypts, using that to dissuade follow-up from the Wargs. They're licking their wounds as Solar Scarabs, but they've still got the opportunity to go if they really want to.
Wow. That Phoenix on its last legs over there, Blur. They could have tried to walk in, but with some low health bars, in particular on the tanks, it's a little bit more difficult to walk in because the Niflheim Wargs they're still full HP. Like, the Scarabs walked in there with the Titan, dropped the Frenzy, dropped the Emoji ult sideways, and that might seem unusual to some of our newer fans, but that the reason for that is cutting off some of the damage that would be coming in from the Niflheim Wargs, and also obscuring the vision, because you have those walls in the way, can't completely see what's going on there. And the idea was, we'll buy enough space, we'll make it more difficult for them to get to us, and then only a couple of auto attacks from Echrome are going to be needed to bring down the Phoenix. But GunTTeRR lands an amazing, potentially game-saving Vulcan ult there to dissuade any further aggression from the Solar Scarabs and push them back. It's very fortunate for them, in fact, that they don't lose any members. Little unlucky they didn't quite grab the bird, but we got another Fire Giant fight cooking up.
Oh, and iSilenced is once again too far forward, getting themselves picked so heavily. And look at all the damage they are eating, but they are coming away with it just about on the barest of HPs. Now Panvich forced to get the ult from the Khepri. Will they be able to buy it out in time? They will, thanks to some extra shell. Now WorstTurttle held the ult so far, went straight in. It looked like a good target, but Zyrhoes had enough damage to stop that fight. It's a TKO on one side, and Panvich is too low to stick around, but WorstTurttle, unfortunately, did end up falling. So the Scarabs now have the man advantage. Unfortunately, some members took just too much HP, so they're having to reset to get everyone for this Fire Giant dance. And that was iSilenced standing a little too far forward. Look at how much damage they ate. It was GunTTeRR ult, Predss CC, Davy ult. What more could they have done to kill him?
Okay, we'll call a spade here, Blur. GunTTeRR didn't hit the ult, right? Like, that was almost gonna kill him, and it probably would have if it did connect, but he got the perfect ult on the Phoenix, not quite there in the Fire Giant pit, so the Solar Scarabs do walk away with the fight and the objective. They're already marching down this bird. They've got 5 more seconds on WorstTurttle, so they could just go straight in.
And they're going to. Echrome even just tanking up the tower just a little bit there, but iSilenced caught in a problem. There's the ultimate that wants to hit, but now River's Rebuke is there. iSilenced will fall to GunTTeRR, but the Phoenix still stands. That's the big one. Echrome tries to get back in. Eventually, it ends up falling. It's a good look, but so much used for it. There's the dunk WorstTurttle wanted last time, and it's good. Zyrhoes pushed low. Shell buys a little bit of time to keep them alive, but Niflheim Wargs, they are not letting that Phoenix go for free. Echrome has returned back, and the Hunter's doing Hunter things, outranging the damage, and WorstTurttle ends up falling. It is a 3-for-1, and the Phoenix. I've got to feel Niflheim Wargs are okay with that, because that's against Fire Giant.
That is against Fire Giant, so they do stop the siege, but the base being broken is a pretty critical component for that one, because this is a pretty interesting and difficult team to siege into for the Niflheim Wargs, just because of how much mage damage they have to contend with. They don't have quite the same zone control. It's not you can't stand here areas, but it is still an overwhelming amount of damage that you have to face tank in addition to, naturally, the Phoenix damage, because they're not going to let the waves go in for free. So the fact that the Solar Scarabs can at least spread out the map a little bit, have somebody wrap around the back side of this middle bird the next time they go to siege, does make their job a lot easier. And in fact, because of that, I would have liked to see the Niflheim Wargs try to get a little bit more off the back of that fight. They got a 3-for-1, they had a decent advantage there, even if not for long. I mean, maybe try to knock down that tier 2 in mid or right lane, get at least something for your troubles, but they played a little bit safer, which not the worst thing in the world, especially when you don't want to end up in that lower bracket. Both of these teams 1 game away from that winners finals. So it does make sense that they're a little bit more careful. Just have to think that that was one of your better opportunities to fight your way back in. The next time that the Solar Scarabs group up as 5 is going to be a little bit more difficult for you.
A touch more so. And when we've got this small lull waiting towards the Fire Giant side, Niflheim Wargs gonna actually say, no, it's time for a big fight here. Echrome was the target of everyone's attention. Fortunately, the Vulcan ult just a little wide on that one. Forced a fair few ults and the shell coming through. I was gonna mention Deathwalker doing their own thing, not even going for the Breastplate of Determination. Instead, we're actually going for the other glyph. And I'll tell you how little I've seen that. I can't even remember its name, Kaizo.
Breastplate of Vigilance is the one you're talking about, that 5th item that he's picked up, and what this one's going to do for you is reduce basic attack damage for 25% after you ult. So the concept of that one is you get near somebody and you ult, and then whatever follow-up damage, whatever they're going to try to do to fight you down to 0 before that ult ticks out on you, they're going to be doing significantly reduced damage to you. It's a interesting utility choice, we'll say. You would usually think, you know, this is a good item to dive a backliner with if you're jumping on top of an ADC, for example, and you want to reduce the damage they're going back for on you. That would obviously be a pretty good option, but I don't think we've seen Deathwalker jumping in and ulting necessarily, Blur. It's a lot more, you know, kiting playstyle where he's trying to use his range to his benefit, try not to be on top of whatever iDavy's doing. Does mean that if WorstTurttle jumps on top of him, that's a little bit less damage is going to be going in his direction from those auto attacks off of that ult combo. But it's a fascinating pickup, we'll say, from Deathwalker.
That's the nice way of putting these kind of things as we reach the 32-minute mark. Fire Giant still off the table. It looks like Solar Scarabs want to play the map advantage they have. They're drawing everyone from Wargs over to this left-hand side. It isn't only minion or only waves potentially being threatened here that Wargs do not want to deal with. So all 5 members are here. Whether or not the fight ends up happening, though. Looks like Solar Scarabs are more than happy just pulling Niflheim Wargs along rather than taking a full fight, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, we've got bigger things to contend with here, as actually Oni has been abandoned by both of these teams, was an option for either one, but a little bit more pressing matters to attend to. The Niflheim Wargs' right Phoenix has just respawned. EFG due to spawn in just a couple of seconds here as well. You can see that timer ticking down. And the congregation on the right-hand side of the map means that everybody knows that this is the next fight. If the Solar Scarabs can get this one convincingly, I'm talking a 3-for-1 or a 4-for-2, something like that, they could take the game here. The Wargs really need to hold the base on this one.
They do, and it's iSilenced eating a lot of ire right now, but less so than before. Notably, Deathwalker also pushing up to be the front line they were meant to be here, albeit on the Discordia. That said, they are the ones leading the charge here, and I like this change up here. It's the CC from Discordia, the long-range poke potential that's stepping further forward. Let iSilenced sit back a little more and just keep the team topped up. This Fire Giant is once again just being pressured out, and it's Wargs who are constantly in and out, but now they're looking a little bit further forward. Predss and it's WorstTurttle on the front side of things. GunTTeRR lands an ult, but it really hits Deathwalker for about half their health at this point. Apreel coming around from the left-hand side. Wargs being pushed further away and now trying to scramble back into this Fire Giant. It's going down low. Out come the ults, but is it going to be enough? WorstTurtle's around the back. Fire Giant's still low, and it's Wargs who steal it away! Now the fight that ends up answering it back is apreel with a double, make it a triple kill. WorstTurttle around the back falls to Echrome. It's 4-for-1. Fire Giant's gone, but that still might be enough, Kaizo.
It very well could be enough, and GunTTeRR has the ult coming up soon, so does at least have a tool under his belt to try to contend. But we're talking 40 seconds blur for 4 different members of the Wargs. GunTTeRR has to pull off a miracle here.
Let's see whether or not it's possible. Phoenix goes down. Solar Scarabs come on forward towards the throne room. It's the best of 3, but getting off to a good start would put them in a great spot. Like you said, no one wants to go back. GunTTeRR takes down iSilenced. They're doing everything they can, throwing the kitchen sink in 2. They'll get 2 kills, and they're actually holding out well, but look at the Titan. The Titan's just taking too much damage, but is it? Because Echrome's too low to keep tanking this, and so is Zyrhoes. Hold! You wanted a miracle, you got a miracle!
GunTTeRR is an angel in disguise for the Niflheim Wargs. Somehow, by some way, finding enough damage, enough space to create for his Titan. That ult landing on top of iSilenced is so critical there, because that means he can't just step in and tank down the Titan for the rest of the team. The rest of the Solar Scarabs just walked in one by one, and honestly, Briller, we're talking a long period of time now where they have 5v2 advantage. This could be a tier 2 tower for sure for the Niflheim Wargs on the back of the miracle that GunTTeRR just pulled off. This could be a Phoenix for them as well, if they have enough time for it.
May very well look to do so. WorstTurttle up, looking for anyone to step further forward. They find Zyrhoes. They land on Zyrhoes. They delete Zyrhoes' health bar. You can try with the alternative timeline. It might not be enough for them. The Phoenix, though, has held. And actually, I eat my words here. WorstTurttle finds Zyrhoes, but the time it bought them is enough. Phoenix got dropped, as did several members from the Niflheim Wargs here. Man, we are in for haymaker after haymaker of fights here, Kaizo. Straight up. Those last 2 fights Niflheim Wargs have won have been the things that held them in the game. Now Solar Scarabs, they're starting to take those kind of fights as well.
And the damage charts are absolutely reflective of who's been doing most of the work in this game so far, because it is definitely GunTTeRR that is making it happen for them. He pulls off that Vulcan ult on the right-hand Phoenix initially to save the base on that side, and then, of course, that incredible base defense we just saw. But Zyrhoes isn't doing too bad himself, man. Even after getting dunked on by WorstTurttle, has to burn both relics. If it tells you anything about how strong this Wash character is, all he does to save that Phoenix is beads, drop his ult on the Phoenix, and then Aegis and walk away. And that is sufficient damage to keep the rest of the Niflheim Wargs from walking in, from doing pretty much any damage whatsoever to that Phoenix. Nobody wants to stand in that no-play zone that Wash creates. Even less so when it's a mid-lane Wash, right? Like, if it's a solo lane Wash, he's got 2, call it 3 defense items. That's significantly less damage you have to tank in order to actually damage that Phoenix. But if you stand in mid lane Opwash for too long, he's got a
That
Book
hurts.
of Thoth online, he's got Staff of Mirrodin online. You're absolutely right, Blair. That is not going to feel good for you. So they don't even get the option to walk forward and deal any damage whatsoever to the Phoenix. And what was an incredible base defense from the Niflheim Wargs amounts to basically nothing more than just keeping them alive a little bit longer.
As we look at this now, 38 minutes in, everyone looking at full items, no more recipes, no more need for upgraded relics. It's 3k potions across the board and wards. iSilenced last item here, Absolution. Now, I know you absolutely adore this item, specifically against Ares. Is it still going to do good here with what the Wargs have for a comp?
It's fine, question mark. I mean, the main thing that, so for those who don't know, Absolution, after you use your ultimate ability, once that one goes on cooldown for iSilenced, you get an AoE pulse around you. And that's going to give you CC immunity to not only yourself, but also any teammates that are near you. It lasts something like a second and a half, so pretty analogous to using purification beads in that regard. It also restores some of their mana, but we don't care about that. The question is, what are you immuning if you're iSilenced here with this Absolution? And the options that you're looking at are WorstTurtle's ult, which is a pretty good one. If somebody gets dunked on and has no beads, you can essentially Geb shield them and cleanse them of that. Or you can prevent them from getting taunted in or feared away by Panvich. A couple of different options, not necessarily something I would have expected, but definitely good utility.
Well, apreel goes in on Panvich, and even though they're a tanky one, they're still taking a lot of damage here. apreel gets their beads forced by WorstTurttle there.
Deathwalker.
But look at GunTTRR's damage output. It's just being deleted right now. Deathwalker does so much work to keep GunTTRR in trouble. The fight spills on over to the right-hand side. WorstTurttle looking to get aggressive, trying to find one, but the Scarabs' blessing is just waited out, and Echrome picks them up. GunTTRR now dealing with Deathwalker, finds apreel and just backslashes them in the face. Now it's a 1-for-1 with both junglers gone. I was going to mention, maybe iSilenced uses that out aggressively. That's 1.5 seconds. You can't peel someone from going forward. Deathwalker, iSilenced, Zyrhoes, Echrome, still looking healthy. And they're looking towards this Fire Giant. Wargs know this is happening, but just look how far away everyone else is. It's only Predss to try and come in. Now Panvich is here, but it's just too late. Fire Giant goes to the Solar Scarabs, as does another pickup onto Predss.
Wow, I can't believe that they actually walked into that one. I thought for sure that was going down. They used Empty the Crypts, they used the Frenzy. I mean, that's a lot of DPS, and if you don't have GunTTRR there, he was still resetting after getting an incredible kill, frankly, onto apreel. I mean, Lobster and Big Man Tings are feeling ripples in the force because of this Vulcan gameplay. But I thought for sure that was going to be the end of it, because GunTTRR's not there to steal it away. Instead, Zyrhoes secures it, and now it's a 4v1 on this Phoenix for quite some time.
Looks like that Phoenix isn't even going to really be contested. Members from Wargs will look at it, and that is about all they can really do. The Solar Scarabs need to get themselves another one, really, to try and break the base. We saw what happened last time. They got way too aggressive in, split them their DPS, didn't even just focus down GunTTRR, and as a result, Titan get to live back up to full HP. So we're at even again as we come to 41 minutes. Well, I say even. Back to where we were about 10 minutes ago, before the amazing hold from the Wargs. WorstTurttle goes up, just sonaring out where anyone else is. Doesn't find anyone. And hey, if a Thor ult's in the jungle and no one is around to see it, did Thor ult?
We'll never know, because we did get to see it, Blur. I think we're all pretty aware that he used that one.
But are Solar Scarabs aware of it?
That's the main question. I don't think they really care, honestly, because they trade out what... Actually, I was going to say they trade the Primal Fury. The Primal Fury not even done there for the Solar Scarabs. So the Wargs just get to walk up and take... Or excuse me, the War... No. Am I tripping? Hang on. The Solar Scarabs.
The Solar Scarabs, there we go.
Yeah, there we go. I'm on top of things. The Solar Scarabs get the Pyromancer Bomb, and they're going to grab that one for iSilenced, which does make their siege even easier for them, because I just found out recently, Blur, shoutouts to Mr. the Wood Frog himself on the SPL broadcast team, Runic Bomb is affected by augments. Like, you can use Frenzy, you can get Enhanced Fire Giant, you can use Pots, Red Buff, a bunch of different things to give you more true damage on the Phoenix. So because they've got the Frenzy, they've got the EFG, this is gonna explode one of these birds. It's gonna take like 1 or 2 autos from Echrome to knock this one down.
That is, of course, if Echrome can get in. Look how far forward Echrome is. They'll actually just tank up the Phoenix to try and put out some shots.
529.
Yeah, 529 on a Phoenix. That's okay.
Yeah.
It'd be okay if that's just only to structures and things, but it's not. That's to players as well before crits. So yeah, there's a lot of potential damage coming through. No one's really looking for a home here. Apreel hiding around in the wings. Now minions are in. Will that be enough?
Davey gets the apple on him, and this could be the go button for the Scarabs.
It could be, and that's a good sign for it. Zyrhoes throws out the ult, and that's what I was asking. The zone control that Solar Scarabs have, they'll just throw out the ults. Everyone is forced to back up from Wargs, and now as a result, 2 Phoenixes are down. Solar Scarabs really dotting their I's, crossing all the T's, do not want to overextend. They'll grab themselves another beacon as they boogie on down towards the Fury and pick that one up. I mean, hey, if this goes to another Fire Giant, 1000 crit there, shout out to that. If this goes to another Fire Giant, it'll be even easier for the Wargs to grab.
That is true. Solar Scarabs are grouped up here. Grab on Deathwalker.
Very big fight coming through, but Aegis's do so much more. All of GunTTRR's ult's not there. Now WorstTurttle in the back looking for a hero play. Can do very little. Echrome, last one in from the original fight. Last one out as well. Silence pulled back in, but the crits rain through from the archery of Echrome. These crits do so much damage. That was a frontline, man. What are they supposed to do?
Die, I guess. I mean, what do you want me to say? He just
I guess
exploded.
I'll just die.
Yeah, I guess you can only grab Echrome. I mean, I'd say that, but then you're just going to get auto-attacked from even closer up, Blur, so that doesn't even help you either. Although I will say, if you're a Niflheim Wargs fan at home, this might not be the worst thing for you, because Fire Giant not due to spawn for a little bit longer, still about, looks like a minute, maybe a minute 15 on that one, and it's a relic graveyard for the Solar Scarabs. So as long as the Wargs can hold the base and get grouped back up around this next Fire Giant spawn, they do have a pretty substantial advantage with no relics for Zyrhoes for another 75 seconds or so, 80 or so on Echrome as well. This would be one of their best opportunities to fight back if they get given the opportunity. I mean, with the Titan coming down mid lane and the already pretty intense grouping from the Solar Scarabs in the jungle, getting to that Fire Giant pit is going to be a tall order, especially without Predss respawning anytime soon. Looks like they're going to have to give it up, but at least on the siege defense, they've got some pretty big targets that they can be swinging at.
And they've got Titan pushing down mid for them, so there's no way this can be contested. The next Fire Giant goes down. Solar Scarabs looking to close this one out. I don't know if Niflheim Wargs can hold it, but they're waiting for a second bomb as well. And that'll just do ridiculous amounts of damage. This is the backup, buy up, and setup for the final siege here. Solar Scarabs looking to take the first game. Wargs, they need another miracle. They get one of their Phoenixes back, and the Fire Minions are out. But there's still 2 waves pushing up into that, threatening it already.
They do have one thing on their side, though. Right Phoenix is GunTTRR's favorite Phoenix, and that one has respawned. He laid it all on the line to keep that one alive previously in this game, and they might just be willing to do it one more time. Still undying is GunTTRR on this Vulcan, despite all the attention that has been on him so far this game. Top damage overall on the team that is behind in this one. I mean, map state very much not favoring the Niflheim Wargs here, but he's still managing to pump out the numbers. Solar Scarabs have one more good fight in them, and they could just take this game, but 46 minutes in, a convincing fight from the Wargs could be a run-it-down angle. They're going to try to spring a trap.
Let's see if it works. They're all grouped up, and it's a split off from the Scarabs. Big ult from Vulcan. Does not find a home, unfortunately, and that could be a problem as Zyrhoes tears down WorstTurtle's health bar. No way they're getting out of that one, unfortunately, as the Scarab's blessing is used on Panvich. He gets away, but it's just too much of a threat going forward. Scarabs pushing in. They take down one Phoenix, and with all those health bars low, it's forced back into the fountain. No ults, barely any relics remaining. You call it a graveyard. That's exactly what it is for the Wargs right now. Mid Phoenix goes down just as quickly. Scarabs, though, they'll back up and they'll reset up for another fight because they're the ones with healing.
Scarabs are hanging out. The Niflheim Wargs look antsy, man. They know that they've got to take one fight outside of their Titan room if they want any shot at being able to hold on to this base. Predss is standing and taking hell of a lot of damage from Echrome here, but they can't allow the Solar Scarabs to walk in. If they take the Titan aggro, if they are allowed to deal damage to it, that could be the end of the game. So the Wargs have to stand in front here where this middle Phoenix was and go for a fight.
And that fight is going to be answered immediately as a blink from Apreel looks to GunTTERR. Beads Aegis being used effectively, but Panvich falls instead. Left side Phoenix goes down to fire minions as Davies left high and dry. The Aegis is there. They'll just about get back, but it's a double pull from Apreel of Jetstream, and that's going to be the game. It took 47 minutes, 47 seconds, but Scarabs get themselves the first game.
Wow, is that that might be our longest game so far this weekend.
I think it is, yeah.
That's a tough record to beat as well. What a siege defense from the Niflheim Wargs throughout what felt like the entirety of that late game. They were on the back foot, doing their best to hold on to the base. I mean, in the end, the Solar Scarabs finally do bring down GunTTERR on this Vulcan. That was the last straw that broke the camel's back. It was an excellent defensive game from the Niflheim Wargs, but eventually the pressure from the Solar Scarabs was just too much to handle.
It really was. And we started this by saying it looks like both teams got everything they wanted. I mean, WorstTurttle on the Thor, it's one of their signature kind of gods. You got the Raijin for the solo lane. You got Izanami for great pressure. Wargs had everything. It's just unfortunate they could not play it to the same standard that Scarabs could. So they'll go back to the drawing board for game 2, and we'll be back at that point. But first, we got to throw it to a quick break to get ready.
That's right. If you go over to youtube.com/SmitePro right now, you can watch all of our great behind-the-scenes content and even some of the content that we have even broadcasted live on air when we have our pros come into the studio, hang out, game for a little bit, and then they go sit down for team check-ins, whether it be tier lists, anything like that. You can go over to Smite Pro over on YouTube. In fact, we even got a new set of series that are, or a new set of videos that are coming out right now. You can even check out the Eldritch Hounds Road to Worlds video that just went up a couple of days ago, so make sure you get this opportunity to go watch that and any of the other content that we put out there. Or if you ever miss out on any of the games, you can go to youtube.com/SmiteVod and rewatch those games if you want to see them again, or if you just happen to miss out on them. So go make sure to check out both of our YouTube channels for all the great Smite Pro related content. J-Mac Mifflin joining me here on the desk, and quite a back and forth game here for quite some time. Great start out, at least for the Solar Scarabs throughout this game. Halted by the brick wall that was GunTTERR on this Vulcan, at least towards near the end of the game. A 1 versus 4 base defense gets a triple kill, and at that point, we're sitting here going, man, so this is now just the turnaround for the Niflheim Wargs. Just got to run it back down in this one. Weren't able to do so, but having GunTTERR on this Vulcan, at least for the Niflheim Wargs, kept them afloat for a little bit longer.
Never has there been a better example of how much one man can do or how much one man can't accomplish, right? Because at the end of the day, Smite is a team-based game, and it's comprised of a 5v5. So it doesn't matter that GunTTERR has just played perhaps one of the best Smite games of his career, if not at least of this year. Doesn't matter that you can stop 4 people from walking to your Titan room or single-handedly remove individuals from the map just by dropping your ultimate. Freehand, by the way. For the most part, he was not playing off the back of CC. Simply does not matter. Because the Solar Scarabs had themselves a very strong early game, and they played well as a team-wide unit, leveraging all that sustain that iSilenced brought on the Yamoja. Saw a really good deal of just walk up, throw up some poke, back up, resustain, rinse, repeat until people were dropped into kill threshold, and apreel can pop off in that scenario. My heart, though, does still go out to our boy GunTTERR, man. That was one of the hypest base defenses we've seen, full stop. I mean, 1v4 fully, takes them apart piecemeal, frame perfect Aegis. I'm running it back in my head. I haven't stopped thinking about it, haven't stopped visualizing it since it happened.
And it might even be enough to maybe warrant a respect ban if that Vulcan isn't picked up in the top 3, could maybe be seeing, or at least if the mid lane selection hasn't been picked up in the top 3, maybe could be seeing a respect towards GunTTERR from the rest of this set, maybe even from future sets onward. 41,000 damage, 7-1 for the Vulcan. But it is the Solar Scarabs who come out on top at the end of it. 9-3 for apreel, 29,000 damage himself, a 3-1 Zyrhoes, and Echrome putting up 35k himself on the Hachiman. Love what we saw at a Deathwalker on the Discordia. Still play with the traditional style of made solo build. Get your defense, get your cooldown going. Though did kind of skip a little bit of the order of his build instead of going into Pythags, double defense, then build out the rest of the damage. End up going into that Typhon's Fang in that 3rd slot instead before starting to get the last little bit of defense for him. So give him maybe a little bit more of a power spike towards some of these 1v1 solo matchups. It's the one that we saw up against the Raijin a little bit earlier on.
Could be, but I'm always a fan of the tankier playstyle. Look, we live in a world now where warriors no longer exist. Couldn't tell you the last time I saw one in any role. Maybe we saw a Surtur jungle. I think there might have been an Amaterasu jungle. Otherwise, no warriors, which means we're lacking in initiation. That is the primary reason we're seeing a lot of these base sieges go wrong as well. When you don't have initiation, you don't have an easy way to start up the fight. If you don't have an easy way to start the fight, you can't exactly create space in these Titan rooms. So when I see mage solos, I do tend to lean a little bit more so towards the ones that have CC and build tanky.
We'll see. Maybe if we do get to see a warrior at some point in this game. So we jump into the picks and bans for game number 2.
Don't tease me, J-Mac.
Or well, we probably just see a couple more mages,
I'm thinking
maybe
that's
an assassin or 2. We've been seeing some assassins pop up in the solo. We saw, was it Loki and Kamazats, I think are the 2 that have kind of found their home over in the solo lane for a little bit, kind of mage-like in their style of play. But we do have Niflheim Wargs going for a Thoth first pick. And then Chernobog. God has been primarily banned away, but has finally got a couple of games himself and will now find his home alongside Terra for the Solar Scarabs here for their top 2.
Yeah, the top 2 here for the Scarabs is scary. Simply by nature of Chernobog, I've gleaned all the stats. I've run through them all right? Gormizer's got this little spreadsheet on all our laptops, and it's indicating to me that Chernobog wins the majority of his games by a significant margin. So that god, just by global presence, what he brings to the late game team fight, is just so incredibly difficult to deal with. And generally when we talk about gods that are going to carry your late game, which is exactly what Chernobog's going to do, and he does it twofold. One, he's got one of the best stims in Hunter kits, full stop. Two, he's got a full global, so he can go split push and simultaneously defend or attack the Fire Giant. But also, he's got a good laning phase. Generally, those hyper late game carries don't also play well throughout the early, so Chernobog, one of the highest valued gods in Smite for good reason.
We won't be seeing a Vulcan, at least not yet. Instead, a Zeus from the Solar Scarabs to be picked up. God that we have seen very little of over the course of this year as a whole. Only a few select players, I think Paul and Venenu at the Pro League have been playing this one, but not too many outside of that. We might not be seeing a Warrior in the solo lane, but we might be seeing a Guardian make its way over there. Xing Chen now for the Solar Scarabs. Opposite side, Khepri, Serqet, Odin.
A
You were
warrior.
just asking for a Warrior.
We got one!
We got Warrior. We got a Warrior and a Guardian over there. So no Assassins, no Mages. There's those traditional tanks you were talking about for the role, Mifflin.
We are so back, J-Mac. We're so back. Look, I actually really do like how Odin plays into this matchup as well. You can lock down the Zeus. You can make it a little bit more difficult for him to maneuver. Terra as well, if you're worried about that peel, and she brings a lot of it. Put her in the cage. She's stuck there. Chernobog, you can jump into the shadow, but once he's in the shadow, no longer has any ability to get out of the cage. So I think Odin has really good opportunity to be a disruption factor. But when I look at Odin, I then immediately say, how many more circles are on this team? How many more Odin cage-sized circles can you drop? I'm not exactly seeing that.
Got maybe a pillar from Anhur, but that's not damage.
That's pretty good.
That's just slow, but we'll have to see if it can work out for the Niflheim Wargs. We get the Warrior, we get the Guardian coming through. Let's jump into game number 2 with our casters.
Wargs looking to keep themselves alive here. Solar Scarabs looking to end this cleanly in 2. And Kaizo, time is such a flat circle that we have gone from mages being the most important thing and warriors being irrelevant to Guardians and Warriors back in the solo lane, and specifically Deathwalker on this Xing Chen. Solar Scarabs have put a really good foot forward here to start this match.
Yeah.
You don't
I'm
sound
not
convinced,
sold.
though.
I'm not sold. I'm really not on the tank solos. I think mages are like the damage characters are just that good. That I don't want to be the bearer of bad news because Mifflin looked so excited to actually have real tank characters back in the solo lane, but I do think that it's a little weird to me to see the Xing 10. He's got a conduit gem over there. Odin as well in the solo lane has a bluestone pendant, so it is going to be some damage coming out of the solo lane, which is, in my eyes, a little bit better than it would have been if it was just going to be the regular tanky characters. But I don't know. We'll have to see how it goes. I think that the Xing 10, more of a question mark for me than this Odin is. You can at least see the idea for the Odin being you want to have something to put Zyrhoes in. You have to be able to control him somehow. It's also pretty good to lock down this Terra, not only put her in a cage, but also shut down the healing from both that Monolith and that Terra's Blessing ultimate. So I don't know. We'll have to see how it goes, but I'm hopefully optimistic, at least about the Odin pick.
Likewise on that. I just like a good Odin in the solo lane, mostly because they get to rotate out earlier. Now, if it was Deathwalker on the Odin, I'd be saying the same issues as mid lane. Got a lot of fighting between these two junglers, similar to last game. And similar to last game, we saw iSilenced go for an attempted invade, but this time Predss basically just says, yeah, I'm not letting you do that for free. We saw a change up in how these two end up working the lane for the early bit of farm. Still ends up with Solar Scarabs getting Echrome all of that farm and a big lead early. Look at this, WorstTurtle's already over here again for this first buff. But apreel might be going for a gank on the solo side. Instead, just going for the farm. So already this tells me a little bit like Scarabs don't really seem to feel much concern about Echrome getting ahead.
They don't, and I think that that's not super unusual. They already put him slightly ahead due to just the iSilenced, harassment around the early buffs, which, by the way, Predss does seem to have adapted to, being able to pull him away from that camp and make sure that at least the grouping of the back camps and the green buff didn't get interrupted, but that does still mean that iSilenced got to walk over and steal the small creeps off the purple buff, which he had done in the previous game as well, so very small adaptation from the Niflheim Wargs. Doesn't completely negate the impact that iSilenced had, but does at least do something for him.
It does, and look at this. Pred's even the one starting to take for a look at a cheeky invade here. Grabs a couple of the smalls, and if last game's anything to go by, we were like 10 minutes in before we saw first blood. Are we thinking something similar again for this one?
could be on Echrome here. He gets rooted out. Holding the dash, has to use the beads, though.
Okay, gets away with a good dash. It's a lot of health, but in doing so, they do get back. They've got a bit of sustain, but the sustain comes through as well with the meditation. As WorstTurttle finds themselves. Was it you said it was the degenerate invades on buffs, but Apreel's caught it, and they'll just follow them along here. Blink, though, at the very last second, gets them away.
That could have been real bad there for WorstTurttle if he gets caught by that. Unless he has Cobra's Kiss up to help peel for himself, he probably is not in a great spot, but does manage to blink away, as you said, so all good, no harm, no foul, and we could be in for a bit of a slower one here again, Blur. Don't forget that despite how exciting the end of that game got after about the 20-minute mark when we got to start seeing some fighting and the Solar Scarabs were at least willing to interact with the Niflheim Wargs at all, it was pretty slow in the early game. This EU playstyle that we've talked about for years and years and years at this point, where you don't take too many risks early on, you're willing to just farm up, even if it means losing out on 20 gold here, 100 gold there. As long as you don't take enough risk that you end up dropping anything, still seems to be what these teams tend to favor. And honestly, I think that's going to be in favor of the Solar Scarabs again if it goes late. This Odin, not the most exciting character to have in the late game. Serqet, typically considered to be an early to mid-game character, though some innate crit perhaps helps her scale into the late game. It's just hard to argue against, I mean, Susano, Terra, Echrome on this Chernobog, which we are saying on the desk has one of the highest, if not the highest win rates in this tournament.
Okay. Bit aggressive coming through from Davey there, because WorstTurtle's looking to get around the back. They hit 5, but they don't get the ult off in time. Instead, they'll have to be bailed out by the Scarab's Blessing. And I was going to ask you, last game, WorstTurttle was the one kind of trying to dictate fights with the Thor ult, or at least start a fight. Is WorstTurttle on that same kind of duty this game on the Serqet?
I think WorstTurtle's job is more likely than not going to be jumping on top of Zyrhoes and then receiving a Scarab's Blessing. That's the thing that makes Khepri so good when you're against characters like Zeus, like Apwash, and Kukulkan that just drop all their damage at their feet, is they're not hard to kill. They're actually quite simple to kill. It's just a matter of do you live through it.
I'm going to throw the ult. There it is. Good timing, but the damage, what is that HP? That's under 50. What? He's got like a little bit of HP 5. It's got to be like 30 HP he lives on there. Apreel looking to try and answer back. Gets the beads. There's now ult being used from Panvich. Deathwalker does secure their own buff as well. So an attempted invade does not go the way of the Wargs. And we're 5.5 minutes in. We've seen attempts at kills, but this time, much like last time, these health bars just barely slipping away.
And that could be resultant of the previous game, right? Like, it was a very tense game that went quite some time, and we had a lot of team fights in a row. Like, it was not a whole lot of lull between any of those engagements. And that mentality could have potentially carried over here into the second game, because this really is a little bit faster paced than we saw the previous game. And you could argue that maybe that's composition-driven. WorstTurttle on this Serqet, a much earlier game character than we saw out of the previous game. Thor needs some cooldown, needs some more items under his belt before he really starts to get involved. But particularly when paired up with this Khepri, WorstTurtle can elect to jump in a little bit earlier. And again, like I was saying, probably Zero's going to be his target. You want to get to that Zeus somehow, and with the Scarab's Blessing on top of you, so that even if you do end up dying, you do still get the kill and the resurrection. Still probably your optimal means of dealing with Zyrhoes on this Zeus. At least for the time being, though, that doesn't seem to be their interaction point.
Not right now, as Apreel goes for a little bit of damage onto Predss. More just a damage check, maybe just cutting the sword against a giant Scarab. Either way, works out without anything really happening here. And we talked about, like, WorstTurttle, who their target is, as you mentioned. Jump onto Zyrhoes, look for the Scarab's Blessing if needed. It's a lot of ultimate damage goes through, but unfortunately, GunTTeRR just a bit wide on that final judgment. What's Apreel's target? Is it get onto GunTTeRR and look for a similar idea? Is it maybe go to WorstTurttle? What's the game plan for Scarabs? You do see a little bit of an aggressive play coming through over around the solo side, but these two, they're just going to slap fight for a fair bit. Rest of the argument here in the mid, though. I'm going to see the rotation through from Predss here, and it's a bit of a change-up. We've seen a little bit of this come through where maybe the supports stick around a little bit more. They usually sit around the duo side here, but wanted to try and let Davy use that early aggression against Echrome, maybe try and start some fights elsewhere. Could be a good look for them here, but 8 minutes in, dead even game state.
Yeah, it's still deadlocked, which, again, not super surprising just considering the teams that we're looking at. I do think that Zyrhoes is even less likely to rotate out, if you can even believe that, on a Zeus as compares to what he was playing the last game on the Op Wash, just because he has even less crowd control and even less survivability than he did the previous game, and he knows that a target's going to be on his head, and it's a pretty darn good attempt on his life if they wanted to go for it. Again, with WorstTurttle, GunTTERR as well, now that his beads are down, excuse me, can drive some of those interactions by dashing in, getting a good root off early on. And even the smallest amount of crowd control could cause a pretty large response from the Solar Scarabs if Zyrhoes is involved.
Possibly. We are seeing a little bit of an attempted group up here. I like this. Just hold, hold, hold for it. And still, oh, it is stolen away. Silence gets it, but unfortunately that's a dash. And there are 4 members around. Terra's Blessing might be good, but the pillar blocks them off. And iDavy answers back with the Fury. Now WorstTurttle isn't even turned on in response as Scarab Blessing secures that. 4 ultimates down. All that over 1 little buff there, Kaizo.
Yeah, for 1 buff. And silence going down there, by the way, not something we haven't seen so far this set. In fact, I think that you can say it's intentional. I know that iRaffer has made a literal career out of this particular playstyle where you're willing to invest your health bar even if it means dying, as long as you can actually start up one of these engagements and produce an opportunity for the rest of your team to fight. He was out of position, quote unquote, a couple of times in the previous game, but that did drive some pretty core fights for the Solar Scarabs. This time around, just perhaps a little bit over-invested in grabbing that shield buff. And First Blood in particular being given up there, split against so many different members. I mean, 4 people got a kill or assist for that kill. That's a pretty darn good bounty for just the first kill of this game.
And hey, would you look at that? We're about 10 minutes in, and we've just got First Blood. So maybe the second verse will be the same as the first, but Niflheim Wargs would like the ending tune to be slightly more victorious for them. GunTTERR goes very aggressively forward, looking for damage themselves. Echrome gets the Living Nightmare in towards the team. But even so, Niflheim Wargs don't seem to care. They're just like, hey, sweet, that's that all off the table.
This is very reminiscent, in fact, of game number 1, even with the early Panvich rotation that didn't amount to much, not matched by Deathwalker. Hang on, Echrome and iSilenced in the jungle here. Should be all right, but even like the last game, we saw Panvich willing to leave lane pretty early on. I thought that was perhaps matchup dependent, where the Raijin just wants to get involved a little bit earlier than a Discordia otherwise would have. Deathwalker, even on the Xing 10, pretty content to just say, you know what, you guys got it handled over there, you probably don't need me, so I'm going to keep farming it out over here. Deathwalker will, in fact, steal away that blue buff. He's been just ulting every single buff, Blair.
He has, but he's not really been punished for doing so. As iSilenced, you can't be walking there, buddy! We saw that towards the end of the last game, just walking forward and getting picked off. This time, I'd say they were very clearly in their own jungle. Maybe some wards might help and get those placed down, but now it's a buff invade here for the Niflheim Wargs. They are not happy about the end of the last game.
Absolutely not. They're playing with a chip on their shoulder, and you're probably right to point out the ward coverage, right? Like, it's only the 1 red dot on the map for the Solar Scarabs, which means they don't necessarily know this Gold Fury is going down.
I think they will in about 10-15 seconds when it rings out across the map and the gold lead spikes for the Niflheim Wargs. But even so, it's still the Niflheim Wargs calling the shots. And this is like, what's different from last game? Last game, they were the ones trying to take fights early, but couldn't find it. Now they are. What's different?
It really does seem to me to be just individual play is different from game 1 to game number 2. In particular, Silenced has been caught out a couple of key times now. First around the overinvestment for the shield buff, which you know, you can kind of shake that one off. But just walking by yourself in the jungle without vision against a bloodthirsty team with a chip on their shoulder like the Niflheim Wargs, they're not going to let you get away with that. And they have excellent tools this time to deal specifically with killing a tank. I think Khepri is underrated as one of the best tank-killing guardians in the game. That grab not only silencing you, but pulling you deeper into the teeth of your enemy team can be very difficult to deal with when you know, couple that with percent HP damage from WorstTurttle, some true damage in there as well, shutting down all the healing that Terra ordinarily would have liked to keep her alive. Silence has to be even more careful this game on the Terra, perhaps, than he did on the Umoja. We just haven't seen that so far. The first death wasn't hugely impactful. It did split a pretty good gold bounty throughout the Niflheim Wargs, but a second death around the Gold Fury pit without vision, that one was much more impactful.
And it gave the Niflheim Wargs the opportunity just to really try and ratchet in a little bit more here. We've already mentioned and talked about how Zyrhoes and Deathwalker, they like to play for the late game. And last game, it worked out for them. Team fights were going stagnant, if not in their favor. Now, though, there is a potential problem that if they show up to a late game fight trying to be the big I am, well, everyone on Niflheim Wargs will point, laugh, and then proceed to kill them.
And they might be proceeding to kill Echrome here. Blink in, no taunt on the mark for WorstTurttle, and nothing really over here except a purple buff, so you can anticipate that's going to be the next target for the Niflheim Wargs. iSilenced is rotating, but doesn't seem like anybody else is going to be coming for this. Likely just going to have to go for a steal.
They'll try for it, as again, the great pillar placement blocks off a lot of damage. Echrome couldn't get in. We did see apreel look towards maybe GunTTeRR, but GunTTeRR looking to be aggressive. Evade and punish, lands a good root, and will boot out a good bit of damage. Echrome actually throws out the Living Nightmare, thinking that was going to be a bigger fight. Scarabs seem to be a little bit shaken up by Wargs here.
They do, and I think a lot of that is how much more aggressively GunTTeRR's playing. He's dashed in a couple of times now just to facilitate opportunities. Now it looks like they're at least flirting with the idea of going for this Pyromancer. Deathwalker's coming.
He is, but look who's already there. It's been a lot more damage. GunTTeRR puts out a big dent into 2, and that forces everyone away. Now GunTTeRR is in trouble with Deathwalker, but Predss still has the ult if needed, and they don't even use it. Deathwalker's ult goes pretty much unheard, and now GunTTeRR gets the ult afterwards, and it still keeps him alive. So Deathwalker makes the rotation. Panvich there first. The fight is a wash.
And Deathwalker doing some pretty noticeable damage there. Has a Book of Thoth online, not quite stacked up, but this is a more aggressive Xing than you've probably seen before.
Just a touch. Silence! That was rude. apreel wanted to keep going, but the wall would not let him. Now Panvich just casually meandering through the 4 members is going to get pulled back in and is going to eat a lot of damage and will be punished for that. If Predss got away with just walking around like that, I was going to be upset.
Yeah, especially because Silence didn't get the opportunity to do so, but we're all about fairness here in the Road to Worlds tournament, so he does die just like his support counterpart. And in fact, only the supports have died so far, so we're willing to call out when supports play well, but, you know, you got to flip the coin as well.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise that wouldn't be in that same spirit of fairness, would it? As we can see, potential look from Niflheim Wargs, with Davey making the rotation before Echrome, trying to be aggressive here. Zyrhoes pulled back in, caged up, but in safety underneath their own ultimate. As this Zeus has not been allowed to do anything they want, as Deathwalker tried to keep a fight going, but didn't have the range.
Zyrhoes actually has to burn the Aegis there just on the hieroglyphic assault after the fact from GunTTeRR in the mid lane. That is one of the core components of this mid lane matchup. Zeus is incredibly good in close to medium range, and GunTTeRR is basically playing the premier long-ranged character. He, with all things optimal, should never even have to take a single point of damage from a Zeus, just because he doesn't have to get close to it.
Ooh, Echrome put low from, again, this hieroglyphic assault. It's GunTTeRR who's doing so much work facilitating all the damage that this CC is setting up. And now with that, Echrome has to back away. Solar Scarabs know this Fury is going down. They have Oracle Vision on this, but even so, it's just taken down immediately. Wargs are playing so well with the tiniest of margins. They are getting so much here.
Now the beacon due to spawn here. It looks like GunTTERR contending for the oracles and dashing in onto a real judgment off the mark.
It may be, but the hieroglyphic assault, you got 1 in 3, and that's all that they'll need. Apreel falls again. GunTTERR. They said their name last game, and it was not for the winning side, but the miracle plays. This game, GunTTERR's damage, he has doubled nearly anyone else in the game.
Now the Niflheim Wargs gonna grab this tier 1 tower after getting the beacon. And you know, Blur, I might have been preaching the wrong narrative a couple of minutes ago because I was saying that the game was pretty slow, not a whole lot going on in game number 1. But if you recall back, it was the Niflheim Wargs trying to force us into a more active game. They were the ones on the front foot more often than not, pulling the objectives, getting 3 of the first 3 early objectives in the first one. So too do they here in the second one. Difference being, they've amounted to a 4,000 gold lead on the back of what they've been doing. And a lot of that is because game 1, the kills were fairly even. It was very few of them, don't get me wrong, but it was just about split down the middle. This one has been much more classic SMITE, where you get 1 pick and then shout out F. for getting the stuff after the stuff. As soon as you get 1 kill onto iSilenced, you force apreel to back, you force Zyrhoes to back, it's Gold Furies, it's Pyromancers, it's Beacon, and that starts to snowball your lead very quickly. The Wargs are once again forcing the Scarabs to interact with them, and while the Scarabs were farming very effectively in game number 1, were managing to keep their gold coffers relatively stuffed, it looks like the Wargs are putting on even more pressure, and the Scarabs are not responding to it appropriately here in game 2.
I mean, look at the way that they're playing this. Apreel feels so far behind or starved from farm that they're trying to take solo farm. Deathwalker is now acting as a pseudo jungler here.
He is, and I do want to talk about this Deathwalker build because if you play Joust, you're probably more afraid of this Xing 10 than the average player because that character very good in that game mode, even though we don't see him much in the Conquest setting. He does more damage than you would think, Blur. Like, he has percent HP damage on the Furious Roar and above average scaling for a Guardian. If you don't beads the Whirlwind Rage and Steel, it's a lot of damage. But hang on, we got a Fire Giant pulled?
We did. It pulled Echrome's ult, and immediately Niflheim Wargs back away from it. Teleport in from Panvich. But this is already impressive. Usually it's Fire Giant flirted with at 20 minutes, maybe test response times. I don't think Niflheim Warg were looking for a test there. They would have gone for it. Instead, they'll take the fight. Panvich blinks forward, takes the ult. iSilenced did use the relic to get away from that. That Phantom Shell now down. Another 2 minutes there. And Odin ult will be back up a couple times before then, so Pyromancer is pulled. Solar Scarabs kind of need to hold this. They can't afford to let too much go. They'll blink on through. Scarabs steal it away! The Furious Roar doing enough damage there.
Wow, Deathwalker somehow managing to steal that one away from the entirety of the Niflheim Wargs. It is probably worth mentioning that GunTTERR and Davy didn't burn ultimates to try to secure that one. I don't think that they were really anticipating a blink in from Deathwalker to steal it away, so fair enough to them, but very fortunate for the Scarabs that they get their first neutral objective of this game. The Niflheim Wargs are continuing to force them to play earlier than they would like. Don't forget the Scarabs with what I consider to be the better scaling team, Echrome on this Chernobog in particular, likely to make things very difficult for the Niflheim Wargs in the late game if we get there evenly. And because of that, the Niflheim Wargs are very willing to fight a little bit earlier on so they don't have to worry about Echrome split pushing on the Chernobog or whatever damage this Deathwalker Xing 10 is going to do. They're just baiting the Solar Scarabs in, and once again, they have to walk into this pit.
And look at this, Deathwalker knows this is happening. Predss is like, yeah, we'll start it up. You're going to come fight us, because Panvich has ult available again. And look at GunTTERR's positioning, peppering damage into the back line to try and find what they can. Look how far Zyrhoes back has to stay back from this fight because they can't let WorstTurttle CC them. Zyrhoes is basically out of these engagements, and they've not got the same long range as Panvich goes in. They're looking for Zyrhoes. They'll find Zyrhoes, but he's not low enough until GunTTERR hits him with the last judgment there. iDavy takes down Deathwalker, and it's a 3v5 situation. Ultimates go a-flying, and Solar Scarabs, they're a-dying.
iSilenced 1 HP under the tower, gets cleaned up, and now it's a Chernobog ult from Echrome. He's got to get out.
Predss actually goes in using their health bar to the perfect amount, cancels out the dash, keeps Apreel safe, and does so much for the team. The Scarabs Blessing used on themselves. Absolutely love this. And again, it was all over Fire Giant. If you don't fight us, we'll take it. And now they've lost they lost the fight. They might even just lose the fire as well.
They should be losing this one. I don't think Echrome's going to be willing to step anywhere near this engagement. Trying to keep that perfect mark on his death column still at a donut. Doesn't want to walk up and end up dying. The Niflheim Wargs are, man, they are just playing these fights so incredibly well. It was a perfect flank from WorstTurttle there to get directly on top of Zyrhoes. He burns the Aegis very early on in that engagement, doesn't even bother using the beads because once he gets grabbed by WorstTurttle with that final judgment on the way, knows that he's already dead to rights. And all of these engagements are just Panvich starting it off. I mean, he walks up, hunting down somebody with that stun, usually specifically hunting down iSilenced, gets him in a cage again that time around. And not only is that preventing iSilenced from getting away, it stops the rest of the team from getting to the fight. I mean, it was basically just iSilenced and Zyrhoes versus the world that entire engagement. And then the waterfall comes through after they're already dealt with, but Solar Scarabs aren't even really getting a chance to fight. The Xing 10 doesn't get any value in that engagement whatsoever because there's no good opportunity for him to walk in and throw somebody into a lightning storm from Zyrhoes or create space for Echrome, who, by the way, next to no damage so far in this game just because who are you hitting? Like, the only people that are in front of you at any point in time are the Niflheim Wargs tanks, and that's when they're actively killing Zyrhoes and iSilenced.
And look at the way that Niflheim Wargs are playing this. They're just constantly trying to push everything up. They'll take the left side tier 2. We do see Solar Scarabs trying to split push and steal away some farm. That's all Apreel's doing right now. But now we've got the Fire Giant Seas, and, well, with that going down, it doesn't look like Solar Scarabs are really wanting to let this tier 2 be contested. They'll give that up completely for free. They're already hovering around the Phoenix here, but it's a blink on forward. They're kicking Echrome into some trouble. They will get away, but even so, look how much space they're pushing. Look at what resources they forced.
They have forced a lot. Titan walking in here, starting to smack the Phoenix. Lightning Storm will actually buy them a bit of time here. Blur Niflheim Wargs forced to back up. They're not quite resetting yet. A lot of cooldowns were used for the Solar Scarab, so they're going in again.
They'll look for it again. Predss still got that Scarab's Blessing if they need to, but it's all on Zeus's damage right now, which is doing a lot of work to deter any further follow-up. GunTTeRR really looking to try and find a home, and that, I think, spells a big thing there. WorstTurttle blinks in onto Echrome, gets them. Echrome gets to just sit inside a wall for a moment and disengage. Sure, they burn Aegis, but if it's not Zeus being hit by this Serqet, it doesn't feel like this Serqet's impact is really felt.
It's not, but they are starting to deal some solid damage to this Phoenix. It's already half HP. Here we go.
Final Judgment lands on Deathwalker, puts him to half. Whirlwind of Rage and Steel picks up Predss as Panvich locks up several members into the Phoenix cage. Phoenix goes down. WorstTurttle again leading the charge. This tanky Serqet able to pseudo frontline like the best of them here. No need for an entry frag. They're just trying to make sure that they can be absorbing the damage to get out, in and out.
And WorstTurttle 100% knows what his job is in this game. He has the Relic Dagger for more Blink cooldown. He already upgraded his Blink for more Blink cooldown. That is the way that the Niflheim Wargs start off these engagements. It's either Panvich goes in, cages in Zyrhoes or iSilenced, or WorstTurttle blinks on top of somebody and grabs them with the last breath. And you're right to point out the fact he is the tank Serqet build. He's got Relic Dagger, he's got the Archdruid's Fury, the Spectral Armor, all of these items just to keep him alive a little bit longer, and then a Jotun's Wrath, mostly just for cooldown. His job is exclusively get on top of the enemy team and don't die before we can get to you with the Khepri ult if necessary. Best case scenario, don't need to use it. He's tanky enough. He can blink in, get the value out, and then jump away from the rest of the engagement. However, if he does get focused down, it takes him a solid amount of time to actually lower his health bar to the point that Predss even feels it's necessary to drop the ult on his head. You're absolutely playing this comp to perfection. I mean, if you didn't know that the Solar Scarabs were up 1-0 in this set, you'd probably think that the Niflheim Wargs took game number 1, because they've looked very comfortable here in game 2.
I mean, you look at the way this has been, it's 7-1. The only time anyone has fallen is Predss when they very questionably walked through 4 members in front of them and got punished for it. Ever since then, Predss' positioning has been absolutely fantastic. The Niflheim Wargs have dismantled everything the Solar Scarabs want to do. Echrome hasn't died, but Echrome hasn't done anything in this game, to be perfectly honest.
He absolutely hasn't, and a lot of that is because he is needed absolutely everywhere at all times. The whole point of this Chernobog, ideally, is that you split push, and actually Niflheim Wargs might be hunting something, but the point of this Chernobog is you split push and then you ult into the fights, but just because the Niflheim Wargs are always grouped, you don't get the chance.
And look at that, Apreel eats so much damage, almost blindsided, so does Zyrhoes. They'll drop their ult, and it's just complete disengages. Now, Deathwalker throws out Woman of Rage Steel against 3, but every single member, I said, they're being dismantled, and look at what's happening. They are being dismantled. Every member is away from everyone else. The health bars all low, no kills go the way, but the same can't be said for the Niflheim Wargs. They're all in the green.
Everybody for the Niflheim Wargs is at least healthy enough to tank up this the Fire Giant, and nobody even close by for the Solar Scarab, so they'll get, well, hang on a second, Deathwalker behind.
He stole a Pyromancer before. Can he do it with the Fire Giant? The answer's no. But he has got enough health to be able to get away. The Abduct doesn't last long enough to chew through all of that health bar. But that is the second Fire Giant for the Wargs. The last one took them a little bit of time, but they did manage to clear up that mid Phoenix. This one, I'm looking at it and thinking, where do I want him to go? Though the pings come out, it's straight down the left side.
Straight down the left, probably send at least one person, maybe 2 into the mid lane just to split up the map a little bit and make sure that they don't get jumped on. Because the Solar Scarabs have a very basic team fight composition. Their entire engagement is based around we use all 5 of our ults at the exact same time, and it's just too much to handle. Whirlwind of Rage and Steel, Typhoon, Lightning Storm, all of these cooldowns are space creation tools, they're zone denial tools, but the thing is, if you're not getting the opportunity to use them optimally, then they're essentially wasted cooldowns. There hasn't been a good time that we've seen that Zyrhoes drops the ult on top of CC, or he manages to cut somebody off. Echrome isn't ulting into any of these engagements whatsoever, just because if he dunks in, he's dead. He is absolutely not allowed to be that close to anybody. So the fact that the Solar Scarabs haven't gotten enough chance to really group as 5 and make sure that they can get maximum value out of their cooldowns just speaks to how smart the Niflheim Wargs are playing. They're not allowing them that one opportunity to get back into the game. They absolutely know that the Solar Scarabs want a 5v5 team fight. That's why we see Serqet and Odin, Panvich, and WorstTurttle splitting it up and making sure that they bring somebody over toward the mid lane.
And now, looking for that left side Phoenix. GunTTERR stepping a little far forward just to try and put out some damage. They'll channel Final Judgment, but I doubt this one's going through, as now it's iDavy who makes the rotation on through. They'll get mid Phoenix. There is an ult going through, but the Living Nightmare goes towards mid lane. GunTTERR's already taken down Zyrhoes. That's all the defensive damage needed for the Solar Scarabs. iSilenced throws out the ult, but more so in celebration, or maybe in mourning at this point, because the way this is going, Panvich is just keeping multiple members busy. WorstTurttle now can start dismantling members as the rest of the team, they're marching on to the Titan. They don't care about finishing this game with a clean kills. They just want to go ahead and say, hey, game 1, that was a fluke. We'll do it 17 minutes faster. And apreel can't get in. iDavy gets taken into the fountain, sure. But look at that. Titan goes down. Niflheim Wargs are taking us to game 3.
GunTTERR is nuts, bro. I don't know what else you want me to say. Don't get me wrong, the Niflheim Wargs have played an amazing set so far. Even when they were behind, they were forcing the objectives early. All of game 1, they were driving in the early game. Same thing here in game 2, except this time they managed to convert. GunTTERR is the absolute perfect follow-up person out of the mid lane. The Niflheim Wargs, with this aggressive playstyle, have had the Scarabs on the back foot basically this whole set. WorstTurttle, Panvich, excellent opportunity facilitation, but GunTTERR with the capitalization has been absolutely on point.
Yeah, I don't even know how you look at it, because the rest of the team fought so well around him. It's like, well, how, okay, if GunTTERR's the only problem, you just make GunTTERR not feel good on this situation. But there's never been the opportunity in both of these games for that. I mean, he was solo, isolated 4v1 and still made it look easy. We'll go ahead and throw it back on over to the desk for more information about Game 3.
Yeah, thank you so much, Blur and Kaizo over on the cast. A big win for the Niflheim Wargs to tie up the set now against the Solar Scarabs, and really just a kind of a great showcase of the carries on this team here, making sure that you can keep that proper spacing throughout the game. All these final judgments just ripping through every single one of these team fights. I mean, the Niflheim Wargs, there's a reason why that this is a number 2 seed. It's a team that has a lot of tenacity, one that can really sit back, farm up if they need to, but if they can get a lead, they're able to run away with it.
Good to see that GunTTERR gets rewarded for his efforts this time
yeah.
around, too. So there is some semblance of justice in the universe, chat. You can take that one home. Otherwise, I would argue that the backline in its entirety there looks very good for the Wargs. Really liked what I'd seen from Davy, even the jungler, WorstTurttle, getting involved a bit there. So I think this is one where it's clear that the Wargs have made a decision to play through GunTTERR, but have played so well around him, as the caster said towards the tail end there, that it just looks like a whole team-wide unit. Early game presence to facilitate, and then mid-game transition towards those objectives, forcing those team fights consistently, playing off the back of the CC. GunTTERR there with the follow-up. I mean, every single one of these fights, even if the clip is not centered on GunTTERR, it's pretty likely you'll see his abilities coming over a wall, doing a lot of the damage.
Yeah, GunTTERR on this Thoth just kind of reprising a lot of what he had on the Vulcan the game before. Just big ultimates in the middle of team fights to really kind of just throw a wrench into the plan to the Solar Scarabs. Davey with a couple of cleanup kills. But it always seems like we come back to a similar conversation when we have teams that have Khepris on them, is that it feels like every team really struggles to deal with Khepri. And maybe that's why we've been seeing so many bans allocated towards that god, whether it be in the top 3 or in that second phase. He just makes the game so much more difficult to play around.
And I think the issue, the Khepri issue, if you would, quotes, Khepri issue, is twofold. One, Scarab's Blessing is just an incredibly difficult to deal with tool regardless of the meta. But we are, again, and I'm harping on it today, in a meta that is generally lacking for initiation. And a lot of the initiation that we're seeing comes from mages like Raijin, who need it from their ultimate. So they utilize their ultimate timer, things like Tycho Drum, to pull somebody in, their Scarab's Blessing on that pull in, and then you have to wait for your ultimate to come back up before you can initiate again. That's why team compositions that incorporate things like Athena or standard warriors that can kind of just continually go into the fight, see if they can grab one person, do it again 10 seconds later, tend to do a little bit better into that Khepri. So I think it's a byproduct of the meta that Khepri has looked as good as he has.
Along with this Khepri, the Serqet and Odin, while maybe not getting the flashiest of stat lines, giving a lot of those kills over to your carries, GunTTERR and Davy at that point. So Niflheim Wargs look really great in making sure that GunTTERR and Davy can get those big kills for themselves. And this is the point where I would say, what do we see proved on into game number 3? But unfortunately, we are not able to provide game 3 to you due to a technical issue. However, we do have the results of the match. It will be the Niflheim Wargs taking a 2-1 over the Solar Scarabs in this matchup. So a big win for the 3rd seed moving forward, at least into the tournament. I believe that this win, able to bump themselves up into that Group C now. Instead, it'll be the Solar Scarabs who will have to fight down for a second chance to jump up into that next seed, Niflheim.
But the Scarabs have looked pretty good. I expect them to have a good showing in their next matchup as well. They are the 3rd seed overall for good reason.
Yeah. Should be at least very interesting to see how the remainder of these sets go through. We can take a look at the bracket to see how this does affect standings the remainder of the way through. As mentioned, Niflheim Wargs with their 2-1. Again, technical difficulty prevents us from being able to get into that 3rd game for you. So it will be 2-1 for Niflheim Wargs moving up. They'll be the first team up into Group C, coming from the Group B bracket at the very least. And then we'll have the Solar Scarabs and the Titans fighting for that last spot to see who will move on into Group C with the remaining teams that are also over in Group A, because we do still have the teams over there trying to fight for those same spots. And again, once we get into Group C, those will be the ones that are then fighting for those 2 spots from the EU-SCC matchups to then go and fight up against the SPL teams later on in January.
Yeah, so keep your eyes. Lots of important matchups coming up. I've really become a fan of the Niflheim Wargs, just based off of that set there. I know it's so unfortunate that we aren't able to finish it out, but it is really interesting to see the individual plays coming through. The EU-SEC has been the more dominant SEC region of years of late, so having the opportunity now to watch it here in studio has just been a treat.
And we still have another set to go for at least today. We do have Hex Mambo and Olympus Bolts, who will still have to face off here. So you have your number 1 SCC seeded team coming out here in Hex Mambo, and then the Olympus Bolts. They've got a tall mountain to climb at this point, trying to fight up against them, the number 6 and the number 1 seed from EU-SCC. So it will be Hex Mambo and Olympus Bolts coming up right after this break.
Hold on, baby, I don't to be around.